Hello Legacy students, Marsh here. So this video is to review the basics of programming in Computer Science A. Some of them being like just basic math information, conditionals, if statements, and iteration, loops. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. This is the focus on the week, so that's why we're kind of looking at the basics before we move on to the more harder stuff. So it's just some regular basic information of math and programming. So theoretically, remember guys, all the normal math operations exist. You guys have used them the entire year. Don't forget that they exist. You can add stuff, subtract stuff, multiply, divide, but do not forget about mod division. Now remember, mod division, what does that do? Well, mod division allows you to find the remainder after something. So theoretically, what I could do is if I want to divide, let's say 5 divided by 7, and I want to know what's left over after this. How much is left over? Well, theoretically, remember long ago in a galaxy far, far away called elementary school, you used to find remainders. So you ask yourself, how many times does 5 go into 7? You were like, oh, 1 time. And then you did 1 times 5, subtracted, and you got a 2. And then you went R2. So mod division would give us this 2 right here, that remainder. Sometimes that's really useful in case if they say like we want the remainder after that. That could be very useful, like let's say in an FRQ that you wouldn't have to write a bunch of code, you could just use the mod division. The other really important thing to remember in math in Java, if you divide 2 integers, you will receive an integer back out. And this is something they love to throw on FRQs, just because it's trying to remember this. So think about it, if I do 3 divided by 4 and I place that into a double, you would get 0, because 3 is an integer, 4 is an integer, 3 divided by 4, that is 0 according to Java. Now, if I want to prevent this, I need to typecast the information. Typecasting means putting this like double with the brackets in front. That would be me typecasting the 3 to be a double. Now, be careful. If you do this, but you also put parentheses around there, that wouldn't work, because what it would do is do 3 divided by 4, which is 0, and then double that 0, which is 0.0. So be very, very careful. Do not put parentheses around the entire thing unless that's what you want to typecast. If you only want to typecast one of them, just put parentheses around the double in front of him. You could put this around that, so there is no way to forget which one you are typecasting. But in this case, this one would result me in a 0.75 to be placed into num. Be very, very careful. They do like to check to make sure students remember that. And it's just an unconscious error that you forget about until you see it and you're like, oh yeah, I divided an int by an int. So be very, very careful. Be just cognizant of what kind of variables you have. Now, if one of these is a double, then you do not have to worry, because if one of them is a double, you will get a double for an answer, okay? The other thing I would like to point out is there is some things in the math class that allows us to work with. They're not often very used, but they're good to remember that they exist. One of which could be the square root function, so you can just provide a number inside of that. And remember, it's capital M on math dot and then the variable or the method that you want to call. So square root, we'll call you a square root. Pow is your ability to do powers. So if I want to do, let's say, like 3 to the 5th, I could go math dot pow, and then the base, comma, the exponent that I wanted to go to. Okay? And then abs is for your absolute value. Sometimes that's useful, especially if you're trying to find a distance from something, like 2 numbers distance from one another. That could be sometimes very useful for information. The other thing that they like to throw on FRQs randomly is the ability to generate a random number. And long ago we looked at this formula and definitely this is a formula that you're going to want to have memorized in your brain. So definitely look it over, maybe write it down a couple of times, however you need to. Remember, it's int in typecasting math.random times high minus low plus 1 plus low. Now, why does this work? Because half the time I find that if students remember or realize why something works, they're more likely to remember it. Well, math.random generates a number between 0 and 1, including 0 but not including 1. So in that case, I will get 0 between 0 and 1 but not including 1. This right here is going to get it so that you have the highest number you want. So theoretically, this plus 1 right here is going to jump you one more than your higher number. Because if I want 50, if I would just multiply by 50, that would give you numbers between 0 and 49. That's not what you want, right? You want 0 to 51 because we're not including 51. This plus low moves that 0 up to the number that you wanted to be your lower number. And then int is what chops the decimal off so you actually get the numbers between the low and the high that you were looking for. That's just a quick little formula to remember when you're completing it. It depends if it shows up. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But it's a formula that nevertheless would be nice to have committed to memory just in case it is in the FRQ. Now, second part of this video, second part would be your if statements. You guys have written a million bajillion if statements in this class, so I'm not going to tell you how to do an if statement. However, just some stuff not to forget. When you're checking for equality, it's double equal signs, and a couple of you love to forget that it's two equal signs. Now, if you don't put double equal signs on an if statement, don't fret, they are not going to dock you for that. However, the only thing that I would caution you against is if you are using strings in an if statement. Remember, double equal signs doesn't work for strings. You got to use the dot equals method. That they will dock you for. So be very careful if you are using strings or any kind of object for that matter. You are going to want to use the dot equals method. A couple of other stuff that to not forget for your conditional signs, not equal to, you guys just use that. Less than or equal to and greater than or equal to. Those would be ones to not forget how to write them / type them on your keyboard. And also the ability to use logical operators. These logical operators are very, very useful in the regards that they allow you to compound things into an if statement. Remember the not, this is a not. He's going to flip trues to falses and falses to true. Okay? So he just flips that case. He's not as useful as his other buddies. However, sometimes you might find the need for him. Remember ands, when you are connecting two conditionals with an and, both of them have to be true for you to get a true. So that would be if it's sunny outside today and it's a weekend, I can go to the beach. If it's not sunny, I can't go to the beach. If it's not the weekend, I can't go to the beach. They both have to be true for me to be able to go. The vertical bars here, that's your or. Remember, the or means that one of the other has to be true or they both can be true. So that's the idea that I buy shoes that are comfortable or cheap. So if they're comfortable, I'll buy them. If they're cheap, I'll buy them. If they're both comfortable and cheap, then 100% I'm going to buy it, right? But if they're neither comfortable nor cheap, I will not purchase them. So both, one or the other has to be true in an or. They're kind of opposites of one another, the and the or in that regard. Now, there is a precedence in how logical operators are evaluated, kind of like a PEMDAS, but without multiplication and division. So math is going to be completed first if needed. So this is your normal multiplication, adding, all that fun jazz. Then you're going to be by your relational operators. So that's your less thans, your greater thans, all those fun jazzes. After that, you have your nots will go first, followed by your ands, and then followed by your ors. Those are going to give you information of what's going to happen for each of those. Sometimes if you are ever unsure and you want to put parentheses to prevent confusion, go ahead. Parentheses will not cause any problems anywhere. Most of the time, they will help you as a programmer make sure that you know things are going to run the way you want it to. These are more for if you are looking at someone else's code and you want to make sure what is going to be evaluated first. Sometimes it's kind of confusing to figure out which ones are evaluated, so paying attention to that kind of stuff. And then the last part of this video is on loops. There's two main kinds of loops that you might need to use slash write in this class. While loops and for loops. While loops are to test a condition at the beginning of each iteration. Usually this is written when you don't know or don't have a variable of how many times the loops needs to run. So it's maybe you're comparing, as long as this number is not equal to 0, keep doing it. Okay, that would be a while loop. Or I want this number while I'm smaller than that number. That could theoretically be also a while loop. For loops is when you have a fixed number of times that will be ran. And a lot of times you'll find that you will probably navigate more towards a for loop because you probably do know the information inside that variable. A lot of times they can be used interchangeably throughout the code. You just need to kind of think a little bit more how to, let's say, jimmy rig, how to make a for loop into a while or a while into a for. But a lot of times you can interchange them throughout your code and it will work. Just be careful on that. Some caveats with loops to be careful of. Make sure to pay attention to the bounds that they asked of you. Ask yourself some questions when you're writing your loop. Where do I need to start? Is that a variable or does 0 just work for my loop? When do I need to end? Is it a variable? Do I know the number? And if it is between two numbers, will it run too many or too little iterations? This is a very common error by students because they don't really think when they write the code. We get so used to starting for loops with a 0 for our index because why not, right? We've always wrote a for loop with a 0 for an index. Like this example right here. I have count is 0 and I'm going to go count is less than or equal to 10. Now on the flip side, this looks like this loop would run what? 10 times, right? Because from 0 to 10, that's definitely 10 times. But wait, that's not 10. This is actually going to run 11 times. Okay? One too many times. Because of this little tiny equal sign right here, he's going to mess up everything. He's making it so we're going to run way too many times. Now you're probably saying, well, Mersh, is that really a problem? It could be. What if we are trying to simulate something and I will tell you to simulate a jumper's jump and high jump 10 times and you do it 11 times. You might be out of bounds in an array that you're putting stuff into. It could cause several problems. So you're probably saying, well, I understand now, but how can I fix that? Well, theoretically there's a couple of options. You could either start counting at 1 here and then let it stay less than or equal to 10, or more commonly, a lot of people will start it at 0 but make it less than 10. That would run it 10 times, okay? So be very, very cognizant of when you're writing your loops and ask yourself, how many times should this run? Be careful so you don't run way too many times. Most of the time, kids will run way too small amount or way too much. So usually it's about one on each side. So be careful when you're writing your loops just to make sure that you're not out of bounds or not looking at the right information, because that would be silly if you have this beautiful for loop but they can't give you a point because you went too far or too little, you didn't go enough, you didn't create enough loops. So be very careful when you're writing your code to pay attention to that, okay? And that's the end of this little review video of the basics of Computer Science A programming. I hope to see you later, and stay awesome, stay well, and stay healthy. See you later, Savers.